The individual is a social creation. That's why individuals in different societies differ from other individuals in other societies, because they individually represent their social group. The individual helps to maintain the social situation and helps to maintain the social situation. If you are so individual, why then does social disintegration, the disintegration of a social system, leads so often to individual disintegration? People beginning to lose their minds, beginning to lose their sense of self, their sense of direction and purpose and meaning, when the society itself becomes unraveled. People committing suicide during depressions and other things when jobs are lost. All of those self-made people and self-determining people all of a sudden coming loose when the social system itself begins to fall apart. Now, ladies and gentlemen, it is that social structure that builds the infrastructure of the individual. And now you're going to have some jokers who want to come along and try to make you think that you can be a person totally unto yourself, and that the essence of freedom represents atomized individuals operating with no relationship to community and no communal obligations and so forth. What purpose does this kind of approach serve? And we have to ask ourselves that. Those who are talking about themselves now as individuals, those such as Julius Lester, who sees being black as some form of social fascism. And I remember Julius quite well. Look out, whitey, black power's going to get your mama, you know, and that other kind of heavy into black, wasn't he? Used black, caught up in black. And it's interesting now, once he's achieved what being black got for him, he turns around and denies it. That's why we felt disappointed with Clarence Thomas and the other people. You're going to use it. You're going to gain the fruits from the use of blackness. You're going to get your job from our demanding quotas and other things in terms of blackness, not everybody-ness, but blackness. And now you're going to turn around and tell us that blackness has nothing to do with it, and it's not important. Interestingly, it was as a common identity, as imposed, sometimes as shared oppression, culture, politics, social behavior, acting against oppression, which to a significant degree has brought us to the present impasse. We have gotten people then who want to equate atomistic individualism with freedom. I would say, to a good degree, we're seeing this kind of thing going on in the black community, particularly by some individuals in the black community, because we perhaps didn't notice that these seeds were already a part of the so-called civil rights movement, but they were hidden by our focus and our attention on achieving our so-called civil rights, and by our dealing with our obvious oppression. For many blacks, if I can recall, who fought during that time, were fighting for what they call individualism and were equating individualism with freedom. Many, we realize now then, were fighting to identify with their aggressor. As Paulo Freire says, for many of the oppressed, to be free means to be like the oppressor. And consequently, there were many of us during that struggle who thought that white folks and their behavior and attitudes, their privileges and so forth, represented what it means to be free, without realizing that if to be free is to be like one's oppressor, then the day that one becomes like one's oppressor, one becomes self-oppressing. And one becomes an ally in the oppression of one's own people. And again, in black-on-black violence, this is what I'm saying, that the black-on-black violent criminal, in a sense, becomes an ally of white racism. He wants to imitate the murderous attitudes of the white man being the greatest murderer the world has ever seen, the greatest killer, robber, and rapist the world has ever known. Yes, I used to hear you say you want your children to be just like them without thinking. Our enslavers, the assassinators of our personality, those people who lynched us, those people who deprived us, those people who killed nations and nations of Indians and others, those people who, wherever they stepped on this earth, the local populations were degraded, those people who developed great death machines and polluted the earth and the world itself, those killers and murderers is what we desired to be like, and represented to many of us what it means to be free. When you take upon yourself that definition of what it means to be free, there is no wonder then that we engage in the killing of ourselves. When we identify with killers and identify with people who kill us, then we ultimately must engage in suicide and self-destruction. And this is often what has happened. There were too many who read freedom to being like white folk. And they fought then the oppression that was coming to us all, not to transform a system and not to reduce the power of an oppressive group, but to gain the right to more closely identify with their oppressors. Many were fighting using the concept of blackness not so much to identify with us, but to dissociate themselves from us. And that's almost sort of hidden in this concept of once we gain our great freedom, people would not see us as colored. They would look at us as some form of abstraction. Why can't people see you in your reality? If you are black or whatever color you are, why cannot people see you as you are? Why is it that we demand that they play some kind of perceptual trick on themselves and not see us in our reality and in the color we present to them, since they have color cones in their eyes designed to see color, and then deal with us honestly and fairly? Have we bought the idea then that if people see us in our true color, that they are bound to mistreat us? This leads us to the idea then that it is our color that is the cause of our oppression, and not the madness and insanity of others who are oppressing us. And therefore, when you internalize this kind of concept, you see freedom as dissociating yourself from your color and trying to get others not to look at your colored reality, so that both can be insane, so that the other who's looking cannot see you for who you are, and you cannot see yourself for who you are. And therefore there were those who fought as black people in order not to be seen as black people. The very essence of schizophrenia, again, and madness, is dissociation. A cutting off of the individual from his reality, and a form of alienation. There were other of us who fought and fell behind the black banner during the civil rights era, not as Maddox tells us, I think very importantly here, Attorney Maddox, not so much for civil rights as for consumer rights. And it becomes sort of interesting that the civil rights struggle centered around lunch counters and retail stores. And you begin to realize that while this certainly was not the whole of civil rights, that there was an aspect having to do with consumption. The right to take our money and give it to people who hated our guts. And we see this still going on today. And again, we talk about this in black on black violence. People don't want to live next to you, hate the sight of you, miseducate the children, want to continue their oppression. And then what do? Beat each other up so that we can carry our money to them, buy the bus loads, and feel proud of ourselves and feel good after we've given it to them. And then we'll say, why are you doing that? It's my right as a United States citizen. I'm telling you, you look at it very closely, and you will see to a great extent many of the rights that we claim we have were really set up in a way so that the white community could get greater access to black resources and money. And watch, as we became desegregated, we engage in the wholesale disinvestment of the black community. And to a great extent, it was a result of getting caught up in these consumer rights, which is another game, by the way, to buy what I want, when I want it, as an expression of freedom. Watch that concept. I was talking to one man here in Chicago who was complaining about his daughter being mistreated by his white neighbors, he being the only black one in the neighborhood. What can I do about that? That's right. Oh no, but it's my right to live where I want to live. And you know, this is the expression of my right. And it's interesting that when we get through defining our rights, it almost always means carrying our money to white folk and giving our resources to white folk. But the ultimate thing that it means is that white oppression did not end there, did it? His right to buy into a neighborhood made his oppression even more clear. He brought his children into even more naked oppression by the very rights that he thought he had won and that he thought he was exercising. And to a great extent, the black community had run into that impasse. After getting all the fair housing laws and all of the lunch counter laws and the desegregation laws and the other laws passed, we were fit to be free at last. And yet we look up, and where are we? Suffering, still talking about what? The miseducation of our children, still talking about criminality in our communities, still talking about disease running rampant, still talking about poverty and unemployment. It was, as the French says, the more things change, the more they what? Remain the same. We begin to realize then that this freedom of consumption was not liberation. You have to recognize then, and we must recognize that there's a difference in class consciousness and individualized consciousness. And what is going on here today is an attempt to impose on black people an individualized consciousness and to make us believe that by being totally free and disconnected as individuals, we will be free as a people. That is the very opposite of what is going to occur. The more we push for our own unique individual freedom, the more we will come under the domination and oppression of others as a group. There is no ultimate individual freedom, ladies and gentlemen, as black people, if there is not group freedom. The powerless individual is not seen as an individual anyway. That is why we talk about what? Stereotyping. That is why the slave master, our master calls us what? Field hands. Not individuals, workers, laborers, because there's what? A category of people there. We only bother to individualize those who are powerful. Individual freedom is made possible by group freedom and by group power. It is the power of the group that provides room for individual expression. Powerless groups do not have individual expression and are not perceived as individual. If you want to get the maximum of individual expression and freedom, you must maximize your group power and strength in the world.
You see, one of the major problems we have as a people is, and one of the major functions, let us say, of Eurocentric psychology and sociology and history and so forth, has been to convince non-white people of the invincibility of white people, to convince us that the white man is not capable of being defeated, that he cannot assume his minority position in the world as he is. This being the case then, and it has made us then think, well, we have to accommodate him. We have to get along with him. Oh, he's going to, you know, we have to live with them because they are in control and so forth. Well, that leads to a type of attitude toward learning that means that you are not going to try to outlearn him, outthink him, outmaneuver him, you see. So if you're going for mastery, you see, then the knowledge becomes very important, and you see it as a tool for advancing your own power interests in the world. If you're not going for mastery, you just see it as a means of being able to carry out efficiently the orders that are handed down. It also limits creativity, because if we are to defeat the European, if we are to master this earth and take back this earth from the European, then we must outthink the European. We must then be creative. That puts the learning emphasis on the how-ness, the how to think as such, and to the use of knowledge as a tool of mastery. It's a very different kind of thing, very different emphasis there. As a result, you see, of the control and the paternalism of Europeans over black people, you see, the other thing that we must recognize, even if the European becomes good and nice and accepts us and so forth, the fact that he would still be in control creates a what we might call a benevolent paternalism, which still to a degree helps to maintain this passive mode of thinking, this passive mode of knowledge. Now, when you get into the classroom, you see a child then that wants to be told what the answers are instead of how the answer can be attained. For instance, sometimes in my class, I give an exam, and we're looking at the results of the exam. And the first question you would get sometimes is, well, what is the answer to so-and-so and so-and-so? And I had to say, look, you must find that answer yourself and dig it up. The emphasis is quite often then on memorizing the answer. So therefore, reasoning as a tool for finding the answer is thrown out as such. And the child then is handicapped in that if he has not memorized the answer, then he fails the exam because he either knows the answer or does not know the answer. You get what we call one-shot thinking. You see, I'll shoot and guess at the answer. Quite often, it gets into a kind of thinking that depends upon personal feelings. Often I find in my classroom, which is predominantly black, sometimes that I have to get the students to separate personal feelings and hunches from dealing with a problem as a problem that is susceptible to reason, not as a problem that has an emotional attachment to it as such. But you see, when you remove reason and sequential thinking and active attacking of a problem as the mode of approach, then the person is thrown back on memorizing, on guessing, on going with impulses, and on being unsystematic in their approach to knowledge, upon waiting for someone else to give the answer. So what you see quite often with the black child in the classroom is somewhat of a miniature reflection of the orientation of black adults to white people. For instance, to a great extent, black people look at Reagan as some kind of white daddy, and we see this kind of business, you know, please, in a sense, Daddy Reagan, don't do this, or are we waiting for Daddy Kennedy to come back into the White House. And rarely do we hear a discussion about what are we as black adults going to do to solve our problem. You see, this is communicated to our children, and it's communicated in a way that they too wait for the answer. Blacks think that we've been misled by our leadership, for instance. They think that we can consume our way into equality, and sees equality as an equality of materials. So if I have the same car as a white person, if I have the same house as a white person, you know, a similar job, then I'm equal. But you cannot consume yourself into equality. You must produce yourself into equality, and you move into equality and beyond by productive thinking. Because as long as you're consuming knowledge or you're consuming materials, the guy who is giving it to you or selling it to you is producing at the same time, which means that you never catch up with him because he's always 2 or 3 steps ahead of you. To a good extent, many of our students go into schools, college as well as secondary levels, consuming, and their minds are not being developed to produce the true means by which they will accomplish equality. Everything else is sham.